10 moments that changed history, fates tied together by invisible threads. Now, we witness the cost of every choice.
Don't forget to support by liking and subscribing. Now the real fun begins. Magna Carta, a single signature, changed the balance of power forever. By the early 13th century, England was in turmoil. King John's failed military campaigns in France had drained the treasury. To fund his ambitions, he imposed heavy taxes on his barons without their consent. Resentment grew, and whispers of rebellion began to spread. In June 1215, the barons confronted King John, demanding reforms. Unable to crush the rebellion, the king agreed to meet at a neutral meadow by the River Thames, Runnymede. It was here that the fate of England would be rewritten. On June 15, 1215, King John sealed the Magna Carta. The document promised protection of rights, fair justice, and limits on royal authority. Though intended to serve the barons, its principles would echo through centuries, inspiring democratic ideals worldwide. Although King John quickly sought to annul the Magna Carta, its legacy endured. Centuries later, its ideas would influence the English Bill of Rights, the American Constitution, and human rights movements across the globe. A meadow by the Thames became the birthplace of liberty. Freedom born from ink and courage. By the mid-18th century, the 13 American colonies were restless. Heavy taxation without representation and British control over trade fueled anger among colonists. The cry for liberty grew louder with each passing year. In the summer of 1776, delegates from the colonies gathered in Philadelphia. They debated the unthinkable: complete independence from the British Crown. On July 4th, the Declaration of Independence was approved. Men like Thomas Jefferson and John Hancock signed their names, risking everything for the dream of a free nation. On July 4th, the Declaration of Independence was approved. Men like Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration inspired revolutions and independence movements across the globe. Its words, "All men are created equal," became a rallying cry for freedom. The revolution gave birth to universal rights. By 1789, France was in crisis. The monarchy was drowning in debt, the people were starving, and calls for change filled the streets of Paris. Representatives of the Third Estate broke away to form the National Assembly, vowing to write a constitution that recognized the rights of all citizens. The Declaration of the Rights of Man was adopted, proclaiming liberty, equality, and fraternity as universal values. Its influence reached far beyond France, inspiring human rights movements across the world. A single document broke the chains of millions. By 1863, the United States was torn apart by civil war. The issue of slavery divided the nation, with the Union fighting for unity and freedom, and the Confederacy clinging to its slave-based economy. Lincoln believed the war was not only to preserve the Union, but to redefine it. On January 1st, 1863, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all slaves in Confederate territory. The news spread quickly. In plantations and towns across the South, enslaved people heard the words, "You are free," for the first time. The proclamation did not end slavery overnight, but it marked the beginning of the end, paving the way for the 13th Amendment and a new chapter in American history.
From the ashes of war, a hope for peace was born. World War II left cities in ruins and millions dead. Nations vowed never to allow such destruction again. In April 1945, representatives from 50 countries met in San Francisco to draft the UN Charter. The United Nations was born on October 24, 1945, with a commitment to diplomacy, human rights, and global cooperation. Today, the UN remains a central stage for dialogue between nations, striving to maintain peace in an ever-changing world.
The Marshall Plan, rebuilding a shattered Europe from ruins to rebirth. In 1945, the war had ended, but Europe was on the brink of collapse. Cities lay in ruins, industries were destroyed, and millions were homeless. Hunger and desperation spread like wildfire, threatening to destabilize entire nations. U.S. Secretary of State George C. Marshall proposed a bold plan: provide billions in aid to rebuild Europe's infrastructure and economies. The idea was not just charity. It was a strategic move to prevent the spread of communism and ensure political stability. Ships loaded with food, machinery, and building materials crossed the Atlantic. In devastated cities, cranes rose above the rubble. Workers rebuilt homes, and factories roared back to life. By the early 1950s, European economies were thriving again. The Marshall Plan not only rebuilt a continent, it laid the foundation for decades of peace and prosperity in Western Europe.
To the moon, JFK's historic promise, a promise to touch the stars.
The early 1960s were dominated by the Cold War. The Soviet Union had already sent the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space, shocking the United States and intensifying the space race.
On May 25, 1961, JFK stood before Congress and declared that America would put a man on the moon before the decade ended. His words sparked a national mission that transcended politics. The Apollo program mobilized hundreds of thousands of engineers, scientists, and workers. Rockets were tested, disasters were endured, and technology advanced at unprecedented speed. In 1969, Neil Armstrong's first step on the moon fulfilled Kennedy's vision. One small step for man became a lasting symbol of human achievement. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War. When walls fall, people unite. For nearly 3 decades, Berlin had been split in two. Families separated, lives disrupted, and dreams trapped behind concrete and barbed wire. The wall was more than a barrier. It was a prison for the human spirit. In the late 1980s, political reform swept through Eastern Europe. Protests in East Berlin grew larger each day, demanding freedom of movement and political change. On November 9, 1989, border guards opened the gates. Crowds surged forward, climbing the wall, breaking it piece by piece. The night sky lit up with fireworks and tears of joy. In the months that followed, East and West Germany were reunified. The fall of the wall became a global symbol of hope and unity. The birth of the World Wide Web, one network, infinite possibilities. Before the 1990s, the internet was a tool for scientists and the military. Complex commands and slow connections kept it out of public reach. In 1991, British scientist Tim Berners-Lee introduced the World Wide Web, making the internet accessible through simple browsers and clickable links. Universities, businesses, and homes quickly connected. Email replaced letters. Online shopping emerged, and information traveled across the globe in seconds. The public internet transformed how humans communicate, work, and think, connecting billions and reshaping the modern world.
The Paris Agreement, one planet, one chance. By the 2010s, the effects of climate change were undeniable. Rising seas, extreme weather, and disappearing ecosystems, scientists warned that urgent action was needed. In December 2015, leaders from 196 nations met in Paris to negotiate a unified response to the climate crisis. The Paris Agreement was signed, committing nations to limit global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius. The fight against climate change continues, but the Paris Agreement remains a milestone in global environmental cooperation.